From the headquarters of Telesur English in Quito, Ecuador, this is From the South. I'm Camila Escalante. Cyclone Idai has killed more than 150 people in several countries of southern Africa. According to the Red Cross and the Red Crescent Federation, at least 126 people died in Mozambique, Malawi, and South Africa. The Information Ministry in Zimbabwe put the death toll at 31. The tropical storm has affected more than 1.5 million people. Tens of thousands were cut off from main roads, and communication lines were also affected. More heavy rains are expected. And people are taking refuge in shelters and camps in Malawi. In Malawi, around 83,000 people have been displaced since the storms began more than a week ago. Most of the displaced are women and children in need of urgent medical attention.
Before my house collapsed, cracks appeared in the walls, and soon after the house came down, we all ran outside and watched it as it fell. We were lucky to have got out with only minor injuries. But many other people were killed and some were very badly injured. Many more haven't been seen since the flood came. We heard crocodiles have eaten some people. I have lost all my belongings.
We are receiving more women and children. Most of them are malnourished and they need urgent medical attention. Sadly, we don't have enough supplies. We are asking the government to move in fast to assist the sick and the malnourished. Some of these children have malaria, but we cannot treat them because we don't have the drugs. Others have diarrhea, and we need oral rehydration and zinc.
Vigils have been held across Pakistan for the victims of the mosque attacks in New Zealand. 9 Pakistanis were among the 50 people killed by a white supremacist gunman and at 2 Christchurch mosques on Friday. The majority of victims were migrants or refugees from countries like Pakistan, Malaysia, Afghanistan, and India. The victims' bodies were not immediately released to the families due to the ongoing investigation, which meant they couldn't be buried within the 24 hours as customary in Islam. Hundreds of thousands of people protested in Algiers on Friday in what's considered to be the largest demonstration against President Bouteflika. Protesters poured into the streets chanting slogans against the president's 20-year rule. Protests also took place in different cities of the country. On Monday, Bouteflika reversed the decision to stand for another term after weeks of demonstrations. But people are enraged over delayed elections and accuse him of illegally extending his term. For a bit more on the current political situation in Algeria, we're joined live by Algerian journalist and political analyst Hafsa Kara-Mustapha. Hello, Hafsa. Thanks for joining us. Protests continue in Algeria in spite of the decision made by Bouteflika not to seek a 5th term. Why do people continue to demonstrate?
Because when he made that declaration, he wasn't very clear. He didn't actually give a schedule about when he would leave office. So whilst it was a very favorable concession to actually agree not to run for the 5th term, which was the main point of contention for the protesters, he didn't actually give a date. He didn't give a schedule. He didn't give a plan, which felt for many, many people as just a sort of tactic to extend essentially his 4th term into a 5th term without going through elections.
And some say that what's actually going on in the country is a battle for power. Who are the parties with interest, and how do foreign powers such as France influence?
Well, I mean, that's the major issue. There are many protesters in Algeria. One of the things that really resurfaces in Algeria constantly is the refusal of foreign interference, in particular from France, which is obviously the former colonial power. But of course, the critics of Bouteflika claim that he has support from France and that this is what is maintaining in power. There's no real indication about that as such. But what is a genuine indication is that on the ground, protesters are ferociously opposed to foreign intervention. This is an internal issue. This is a matter for Algerians to deal with inside Algerian border and amongst Algerians. And there is a refusal, categorical refusal of any foreign meddling.
And how big of an issue is the current economic situation and citizens' discontent?
Well, it's mainly partly due to the collapse of the oil prices. In the early years of Bouteflika's presidency, oil prices were booming, which obviously allowed him to invest heavily in infrastructure, in housing, etc., which actually gave the population sort of respite. But since the collapse of oil prices, the economy has increasingly suffered, and I think that has kind of nudged people into taking to the street. And we know for a fact that usually it's always linked to economic crisis. There is a sense of discontentment, and the increasing popularization of certain categories of society have led to this mass movement, which is linked to the collapse of oil price, obviously.
And what should we expect from the current crisis going forward?
Well, there is talk that the President Bouteflika will step down on the 29th of April, which was the initial date for elections, or thereabouts, somewhere in April. I think we were expecting some sort of reaction in the coming days, in particular if there is another mass protest, which is in the pipelines. And I think that the population is now determined. You know, the weather is very nice. Friday, there's not much to do. So that all the ingredients are gathered to encourage people to take to the streets, and if the president doesn't react to that, then there will be ongoing protests.
Thanks so much for being with us today. That was Algerian journalist and political analyst Hafsa Kara-Mustapha. Now to South Africa, where hundreds of revolutionary workers gathered outside of the U.S. consulate in Sandton, Johannesburg, against U.S. interference in Venezuela. Several left-wing parties and political organizations supported the International Day of Action for Peace and Sovereignty in Venezuela. Our reporter, Aisha Ismail, was there and filed this report.
International solidarity was the theme of this protest. Organizations representing workers made it clear that they stood firmly in solidarity with the people of Venezuela.
We can see exactly what the US together with the EU are trying to achieve. It's nothing else but a coup. It's illegal regime change. Juan Guaido is not a legitimate president of Venezuela. Nicolas Maduro is. And every free-thinking member of the working class must come out to defend the rights of Venezuelan people to dictate their own path and their own sovereignty.
The Socialist Revolutionary Workers' Party said it denounced the ongoing economic, political and media terrorism being waged by the global capitalist elite against Venezuela. Former South African government minister Ronnie Kasrils also joined the protest and had this message for the people of Venezuela.
We are with you. The world is with you. Yours is a just struggle. We support you. You are not alone. Be firm like President Chavez was, like Fidel was, like the revolution has been all over the world. It was our struggle here that overthrew apartheid. Our force here is with your force to stop imperialism in its wicked attempts.
The Workers' Party called for an end to sanctions against Venezuela and threatened to boycott American products should their demands not be met. Aisha Ismail, Telesur, Johannesburg.
Hundreds of people are gathering in Venezuela to celebrate peace after the attack on the electrical system of the country. People are gathering near the presidential palace in Caracas to show their support to President Nicolas Maduro. Demonstrators say that they will stand together against U.S. interference attempts. Thousands also took to the streets on Saturday to call for the Bolivarian people to remain united. Our correspondent, Edson Sanchez, is at the gathering and brings us the latest.
We are close to the presidential palace, where Venezuelans are gathering in defense of peace. Demonstrators say they will remain in the streets to show their support to the government and to defend their country against the interference attempts of the United States, especially after the sabotage to the electrical system that Venezuela faced last week. Many have told us that it is peace and joy that has won as they enjoy music and other activities here at this gathering.
We'll take a short break now. Join us again in a minute. Welcome back. Tension has increased in the Colombian Department of Cauca after security forces used repressive tactics against a social gathering between indigenous people, campesinos, and Afro-descendant people. Our correspondent Jose Manuel Jimenez has the latest in this report.
In the southwest of Colombia, in the department of Cauca, the social gathering, also known as Minga, continues with indigenous people, campesinos, Afro-descendants, taking part and no more than 2,000 college students that are joining them. We have confirmed that in the late evening of Saturday, security forces repressed again another meeting in El Pital, Caldono, Cauca. This adds up to the previous repressions reported in El Cairo, Caijibio, Cauca. Repressions has taken place daily and constantly at the places where indigenous, campesinos, and Afro-descendant people are meeting and discussing. They are waiting for the visit of President Iván Duque, something they asked the government days before. They want to dialogue with authorities to demand their right to own land. They are also requesting international bodies such as the Organization of American States and the United Nations to continue monitoring what's currently going in this region. They have invited international bodies to visit the area to verify how security forces are repressing them during these last days of meetings. 15 people were injured during this social gathering that has celebrated peace, life, democracy, and justice. Attendees are also asking for the peace agreement to be fully implemented in this region and for the end of the killings of social leaders across the country. Violence has been ongoing in different parts of the country, and social movements say there is not political will to implement peace and make a real change.
Authorities in Bolivia are continuing to fight against gender violence and are now treating this as a priority issue. More in this report.
Not the protests or the new laws have achieved the goal of decreasing the high number of femicides in Bolivia, one of the most affected countries by gender violence. But at least now there are weapons to face it.
The Law 348 has defined 17 types of gender violence, among them the feminicide. This has allowed us to make this problem visible, but what worries me is that this is an ongoing problem. Let's not forget that masculinity and machismo is very present, not only among men, but also for women.
International organizations are also launching new strategies, as they are worried about the tragedy of femicides.
This region in particular has one of the highest rates of femicides in the world. In Bolivia, we estimate that 128 women were killed last year. Every 2 days, a woman is killed, and these crimes remain in impunity. A cultural change is needed at the schools, in the communities, among the families.
The current Bolivian law is recognized as one of the most progressive in this matter, and it's said that it's a useful tool against the killing of women, a crime defined as femicide.
Before, our law didn't contemplate the figure of femicide. We used to define femicides as the murder due to violent emotions. For example, when you heard, "I was jealous, so I killed her." It is not like that anymore. This has become a visible problematic, and now it is defined as a penal crime. This has helped to raise awareness, but of course, there is still a lot to do.
There are laws to punish these crimes, but they need to be implemented by those responsible in municipalities, by the police, and especially by judges.
The police, the prosecutor, and the judiciary have to establish protocols for the victims. They cannot justify these crimes by saying she was walking alone with 5 men, or that it is her fault because she was wearing a short skirt, or that she was walking late at night, or that she was drunk, as if that was an excuse for violence.
One of the greatest problems is impunity. Our research has revealed that only less than 5% of the femicide cases reported ended up with a sentence.
Around 2,000 anti-abortion Ecuadorians protested against a debate in the National Assembly which is discussing an ease to the law on abortion and rape cases. The National Assembly needs to hold 2 rounds of debate before lawmakers can hold a vote. Abortion is only legal in Ecuador when the life of the woman is at risk or if she's a rape victim with a mental disability.
Penalizing abortion is condemning women to get sick, to die, and to lose their freedom. It doesn't stop a woman from aborting, but what it does do is make the conditions to do so harmful, unsafe, and it puts us at risk.
But pro-choice groups argue that outlawing abortion only pushes women to seek clandestine abortions, putting their lives at risk. Unsafe abortions accounted for 15.6% of all deaths of women in Ecuador in 2014, the fifth biggest cause of mortality for women and the third largest cause of maternal deaths. Brazil's first trans state congresswoman has been sworn in. This historic moment was celebrated by a crowd that paraded through the streets of Sao Paulo. Our correspondent, Brian Muir, has the story.
On opening day of São Paulo's 2019 state legislature, a crowd of supporters of Brazil's first trans state congresswoman, Erica Malunguinho, gathers to dance and march with her into the state capitol building on her first day of work.
This moment is important because people who have been silenced throughout Brazilian history have gained a voice, the trans and black population. And I believe that it is a moment to celebrate our ancestors and our victory, and to understand that our space has come from far back. There is a story that was built which brought us here, and from this point forward, this story will be constructed in the first person.
Eric is a member of the Socialism and Liberty Party, PSOL, the same party that slain city councilwoman Marielle Franco belonged to. As the procession nears its destination, supporters of far-right President Jair Bolsonaro begin to heckle the crowd.
This is not a madhouse, okay?
As they near the Capitol building, Erica stops the procession and explains her mission.
It's culture, it's politics, and it's people who are black.
Brazil's first ever trans state lawmaker walks into Congress to get sworn in. Her supporters are directed into a hall to watch the event on TV, and as they hold up signs saying "Who killed Marielle Franco?" and "Black Lives Matter," fascists taunt them with screams of "I'd rather be dead than red," but this does nothing to dim the spirits of Erica's supporters.
This is a historic moment because it's a black trans woman from Pernambuco, and I'm very happy. It would have been unacceptable for me to stay at home like this. I am a black woman, a historian and a rapper, and I had to be there.
Brian Muir, Telesur, São Paulo.
The Catholic Church in El Salvador has rejected the proposal for a new amnesty law. According to the church, this new law would promote impunity instead of bringing justice for the victims of the Civil War. The bill has been proposed by lawmaker Rodolfo Parker from the Christian Democratic Party. The church has joined the criticism already being made by social movements regarding this bill. People of the Ixcan-Quiche community are still demanding justice for the massacre of its people 37 years ago at the hands of the Guatemalan army. Survivors are remembering the victims and how these events changed their lives.
These are some of the survivors of Ixcan-Quiche community who took part in a pilgrimage to remember the victims of a massacre led by the army that took place 37 years ago.
We remember all that suffering on this day. It's similar to the life of Jesus Christ, when he was beaten up by soldiers and crucified. For that, we have the Holy Week, and this is what we do for our martyrs and relatives. We will always remember them.
Survivors say that the Guatemalan army captured and killed more than 400 people of the community over 3 days. This forced thousands of Guatemalans to flee to Mexico.
We saw warplanes and helicopters fly by, heard about what the army did to them. We witnessed the suffering of our Guatemalan brothers when they crossed the border.
37 years have passed since the massacre, but to this day, survivors still mourn the loss of their relatives. For many, the massacre also had an impact on their way of living.
It happened a long time ago, but the pain and worry have remained. It was a tragedy to see my husband's blood spill all over the ground. Since that day, there is no one to work the land.
Families still demand justice and have strongly condemned that some soldiers are seeking a bill to be approved to favor those responsible for the genocide by reforming the law of national reconciliation.
They want these murders to get away without punishment. They want the country to believe these people didn't do anything. But thank God there are people who raise their voices against this reform because it will disgrace the memory of our victims.
The initiative has been debated in Congress twice, but the Inter-American Court of Human Rights have demanded lawmakers not go through with the reform as it's seen as an attack on the victims' right for justice.
We'll take a short break now. Join us again after this. Welcome back. Flash floods and landslides triggered by torrential rain in Indonesia have killed at least 58 people. More than 4,000 people have been displaced and dozens injured. The National Disaster Agency says the number of victims could increase since the evacuation process is still taking place and since not all affected areas have been reached. Displaced people are sheltering in 6 evacuation centers. Authorities have warned local governments of flash flood risks due to deforestation in the mountains.
Our head of agency, Donny Monardo, has reported to the president regarding the flash floods in Sentani and the measures taken to mitigate this disaster. Orders from the president include acceleration of evacuation, search and rescue of victims, for the deceased to be buried as quickly and as properly as possible, and the government would give compensation and for the injured to be treated as well.
A ceremony has been held in Ethiopia signifying the burial of those killed in last week's plane crash, which killed 157 people. Friends and relatives arrived at the Addis Ababa's Holy Trinity Cathedral to bury the remains of those who died in the accident, including the 2 pilots and 6 crew members. Relatives received charred earth from the crash site to bury, since most bodies were destroyed by the impact.
This will serve as closure for the family. According to our tradition, you try to forget things once you have reached this stage. We know that the person that is gone will not come back. Her husband is now left with an infant. He must shift his attention to his life and raising his baby. Her father and mother, including his sisters, are devastated by this grief, and everyone has to go back to their lives, as we cannot live like this forever.
Iran's chief of staff has arrived in Syria for an official visit. The head of Iran's armed forces, Mohammad Bakari, arrived in Damascus for a series of meetings. His main goal is to coordinate plans to tackle terrorism in the region. And meanwhile, much of the Islamic State's last enclave in eastern Syria has fallen. Reports say that at least 10 civilians were killed during airstrikes. Thousands of people, most of them families of Islamic State fighters, had surrendered since U.S.-backed forces led by the Kurdish YPG laid siege to the city of Baghouz. However, some civilians have yet to be evacuated.
I think it's hard to estimate when it is going to be over. We are facing several difficulties regarding the operations, the big number of mines and explosive devices planted by ISIS, and the existence of tunnels and hideouts used by ISIS beneath the ground that are using them to attack our forces or to defend themselves by it.
Yellow vest demonstrators in Paris are on their 18th week of protests, this time occupying a Starbucks cafe to denounce the coffee chain's tax evasion. On Saturday, demonstrations were once again held on the Champs-Élysées, where battles sparked between police and protesters. The Interior Ministry estimated that the turnout in Paris was about 10,000 people out of about 32,000 people nationwide. Around 230 people were arrested in the capital. And the French government is being criticized for the events that took place on Saturday. In an interview with local media, the mayor of Paris, Anne Hidalgo, said she was waiting for, quote, an explanation from the government, adding, "We're in the middle of a major social and political crisis. We can't carry on like this." Still in France, an anti-Bouteflika rally has taken place in Paris. A few thousand people, mainly from the Algerian diaspora, gathered to protest against the indefinite extension of President Bouteflika's mandate. Protesters chanted for a free Algeria. They also criticized the interference of the French government in its former colony. We've come to the end of this news brief. You can find these and many other stories on our website at tellusenglish.net. And join us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. For Tell Us Our English, I'm Camille Escalante. Thanks for watching.